Good morning, everyone. I think we're still waiting for a few folks to join the meeting. I hope everyone's having a good morning.
Good morning, Amira. This is Chris.
Hi, Chris.
Good morning back here.
We'll start doing introductions in a little bit once we have a few more members join. I see Bob's on. Just as a reminder, it's being this meeting's being recorded, and it might be a good idea to test. It might be a good idea to test video and audio now, just in case something's not working. Courtney's here, and we can try to get that figured out beforehand.
Good morning, Amira. This is Kirsten Green. Yes, Quinn is also mentioning the host has disabled the video, so we are all using our stock cover placeholder thingy.
Correct.
Thank you.
Get the same message.
Okay, let me fix that right now. Sorry about that.
No problem.
How about now?
Looks like it works.
There we go.
Thank you.
Not for me, but
Oh, something's wrong with your video, Bob? There you go.
We see you now.
okay, thank you.
Okay, I sincerely apologize about that.
If that's the only tech challenge that happens, Amira, I think we're winning. Thank you.
I'm getting better and better with the, I don't know, the Zoom.
Right. It's a
Slowly.
It's a universe. It's a place. Thank you.
Courtney, this is Sadie. I emailed you our presentation. I'm not sure you were able to receive it because it was 17 megabytes. It might still be like churning through my outbox. But I think it might be easiest. I've looked and it seems like I have the capability of sharing my screen. So I can pull the presentation, the DLCD presentation up on my screen and share it. And then I'll just advance the slides at people's cues if that works okay for you guys.
Perfect. I think that's probably the easiest way, especially because you'll be giving the presentation. I think I did get it. I have all the presentations are up on the website, so you can definitely check there, but I'm pretty sure that one is up there. I have all of them I've received are there. So
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I see that Joel also joined. Good morning.
Morning, everyone.
Morning, Joe.
See Ben, Valentine, Bob, Quinn. Did anyone else say they couldn't join today?
I think just Gustavo.
See Jim too. Well, we can just go ahead and get started. It is August 20th at 9 o'clock. Welcome to the third quarter's EJTF meeting. And we can do a quick round of introductions and folks can just say their name, pronouns, organizational affiliation. And it's almost fall, so what's one thing you're really hoping to do before summer ends? So I'll go first. Joel, he, him, his. I'm the chair of the EJTF. I'm also with the One Oregon Coalition. I would like to do one last float on the river. So I know we've got like 2 weeks left. It was super hot a few days ago. went on a float last week. I didn't get a chance this weekend. So hopefully this weekend or next weekend, I'll have a chance to float the Mackenzie River, leave my phone at home, and enjoy some sunshine. So check. I'll pass it on to Bob.
Good morning. My name is Robert Collin. I'm a retired professor and author. One thing I'd like to do before the summer ends is jump in a lake and go swimming. It's those fires that are in the way. But I'll pass it on to Ben.
Good morning, Ben Duncan. My day job's Chief Diversity and Equity Officer at Multnomah County. I'm formally representing the Oregon Commission on Black Affairs for this meeting. Use he, him pronouns. I feel like summer's already over. Shit, I'm already, we're trying to, figure out what we're gonna do with our kid. Work hasn't slowed down. I have no vacations. But yeah, I agree. Getting in some water would be nice. Maybe a camping trip before the weather turns would be wonderful. Thanks. I'll throw it to Hui.
Good morning, everyone. Hui Ong, Executive Director, Opal Environmental Justice Oregon. That's my day job. He, him. Glad to see folks. And the check-in question is,
What's one thing you're hoping to do before summer ends? Like your last big summer activity?
getting a very clear school schedule, co-parenting lined up. That is my key bit here. And I'm gonna ask you, Joel, to pass it on to someone. I don't know who else.
Sure. I'll pass it on to Quinn.
My name is Quinn Reed. Good morning. Pronouns are she, her. I am the Oregon Policy Director for the Center for Biological Diversity. Before the end of the summer, I agree with everyone else. I would love to get out for one more camping trip. And for the love of God, I would love to get a tan because it has been bleak this year. So those are my goals. And I will pass it off to Valentin.
Good morning. My name is Valentin Sanchez, and I work with the Oregon Law Center, and my pronouns he, him, his. I guess one thing that I would like to do before summer ends, I have 4 kids. They've been bugging me about going camping, so we'll have to plan that out and see. And I'll pass it on to Jim.
Okay, had to unmute myself there. Jim Kreider from Eastern Oregon. I'm retired, kind of trying to get into good trouble. That's what we're doing out here in Eastern Oregon. And the one thing that I'd really like to do is get back out camping and get on a river. I think all of us are sick of being confined in our homes with all the smoke. And like our airport lit up yesterday, we're getting all sorts of the tankers coming in. We probably have about 20 fires around us. So in my spare time, I use my binoculars and look down at the airport and how long it takes them to refuel a plane and get it back up in the air. So if you want to know the times on that, I can let you know.
I'm gonna have David go next. David, can you hear us?
Sorry, is this introduction time?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, this is David Tam, Oregon Commission on Asia Pacific and Affairs.
And David, can you share with us what's one thing you're hoping to do, one last summer thing you're hoping to do before fall gets here?
Have a few more sessions surfing in the water.
Hell yeah. Thanks, David. And I'll pass it on to Amira.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Amira Streeter. I'm the Natural Resources Policy Advisor to Governor Kate Brown, and I help staff the Environmental Justice Task Force. Pronouns are she, her, hers. And one thing I'm definitely looking forward to doing this summer is more paddleboarding. I just learned how to paddleboard and stand up for the first time on a paddleboard last weekend. So I definitely want to do that a couple times before the summer ends. I'm going to pass it on to Kristen. Sheeran.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kristen Sheeran. I work with Governor Brown on her climate and energy policy issues and priorities. Here to answer any questions there might be about the executive order. As far as the summer, Amira, I didn't realize you like paddleboarding because I love paddleboarding, and one of the things I want to do before now and the end of the summer is get out there a little bit more. So let's see if we can find the time to do it together. That would be special. I'm not see who else maybe hasn't gone yet. Has everybody had a chance, Amira? Do you have the?
So I think we've done all the EJ task force members.
Just everyone.
Yeah, and then maybe we should pass it on to Courtney and then the DLCD team, and then they can get started.
Sweet.
Hey, I'm Courtney with the governor's office. I'm an executive assistant there. Something I'm looking forward to, I don't know, I'm easy. I just like going on walks. I've been doing so many walks and just get more walks in.
It's Courtney.
DLCD.
Thanks, everyone. Good morning. My name is Kirsten Green, and Sadie's going to start us off, but with respect to time, if we could just maybe we introduce ourselves as we speak, Sadie, instead of going all the way around, if that works.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Thank you.
So good morning, everybody. I'm Sadie Carney. I'm going to share my screen now so that you can all see our presentation here. Is that coming through for everybody?
Yes.
It's sort of,
Yes.
it makes my video feed freak out. So I am going to minimize that. Okay.
And also, as Courtney was saying, this is all posted on the website and materials are ready to go.
Great. So good morning, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity. My name is Sadie Carney. I'm a policy analyst and communications manager with the Department of Land Conservation and Development. And I'm also our staff liaison to the Environmental Justice Task Force. And we have with us today from DLCD a pretty big team. We have a contingent of transportation planners and our planning services manager, Matt Kroll. So for transportation planners, we have Bill Holmstrom.
Would you like to advance the slide, Sadie, my friend? I'm sorry.
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. I did mean to. Thank you, Kirsten. Matt Kroll, our planning services division manager, and then Bill Holmstrom, Cody Meyer, and Evan Manvel are all transportation planners. Chris Shirley is the state's climate change resilience coordinator, updating our climate change adaptation framework. And then, as you have heard, Kirsten Green, our deputy director. We have a two-part presentation today that starts with a conversation about climate mitigation, mitigation efforts related to the governor's executive order 2004, and then we'll move on to a part of the presentation that addresses Chris's work on the climate change adaptation framework and talk about our adaptation efforts. We're hoping to take 30 minutes for each presentation, presenting for 15 minutes, and then hoping to have half of our time in conversation with EJ members. So I am going to advance this, and I think Kirsten is going to take it from here.
Thank you, Sadie. Good morning, task force members. I think that I should probably address the chair as well. I couldn't find all the titles on the task force, so my apologies. We are really pleased to be here today and appreciate the time. We will move quickly through our presentation slides as a team because we're here to receive your guidance to the extent you'd like to give it, and then get out of your hair so you can proceed with your full agenda for the 2 days. Amira, just or to chair, if you would like to just advise me if we should we have a couple of key questions for each section. I wonder if we should take those questions during the presentation or just go through our slides and then take the questions after.
I think we should just go through and finish the whole thing, and then folks can ask questions at the end.
Thank you, Chair. Perfect. Okay, so I know that this body is, this esteemed body is familiar with Governor Brown's executive order and the reasons for it. I go by she, her, hers pronouns, and I also would like to put my feet in a river or a lake one more time before fall. Several of you mentioned the wildfires. This is all around us. Oregon is not meeting our goals, particularly from the land use and transportation sector, and that is where DLCD sits in the world, is in comprehensive planning for cities and communities, assisting local governments with that work. The governor's executive order, you know, as you all know, sort of restated and increased our need to comply and reduce greenhouse gas emissions over time. So we have even more urgency than before because we have been falling behind. So appreciate any guidance you have. This is a full frontal effort at our agency. Centering equity and responding to climate is the top priority of our commissioner and our director. Again, thank you for having us. We are in a learning mode and appreciate any guidance you will have. Sadie, if you could, I was trying to advance the slide, sorry. So I mentioned the change in the greenhouse gas reduction goals. I just wanted to speak to the three main areas of focus for DLCD that are mentioned in the governor's executive order from March. You know, we have a number of proposed actions. I won't go over those today, but you will hear about adaptation. We're enthusiastic to participate in the work group on the interagency work group on impacts on impacted communities and the racial, the Council for Racial Justice as that comes to formation here shortly. We have our section in section 9 where the governor called our agency out and directed us to implement the statewide transportation strategy, which was a framework developed a decade ago. And the current 4 agency work on that is every mile counts. I might ask the adaptation strategy is 24 agencies. So I'm going to go with our little bitty intergovernmental work here first with just the 4 agencies, and then turn it over to Chris and she'll do the second half of the presentation for adaptation, which is 25 agencies. We also kind of opted in on section 12. We weren't named, but we want to support the Oregon Global Warming Commission's work with respect to carbon sequestration, particularly on farm, forest land, and in estuaries. And obviously, you know, we're all focused on centering equity and figuring out what that means on project specific as well as programmatically. Sadie, if you could please advance the slide. We're very inspired to receive the guidance of the governor's COVID framework for COVID and equity in June. And so we take up that definition and it guides our work until we receive additional guidance. Sadie, if you could advance the slide, please. So I mentioned this, Sadie mentioned it, but so we have 2 kind of main threads of work at our agency, which is currently about 64 people in the entire agency. Just to say, we, you know, a couple hundred cities to support around the state. We love our work and we're engaged in it, but it's a relatively small agency as far as the state goes. So we're pleased to be networked and need to be networked with partners from the Oregon Health Authority and also the 4 agencies mentioned here with the statewide transportation strategy. But this again is to reduce tailpipe emissions. This is about when we all drive. And the transportation choices we have to use alternative forms of transportation, whether they're stand-up paddleboard or bikes or walking or transit. That's the goal, is to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So I won't go into detail, just we really do want to get to discussion. If you could advance the slide, Sadie, there is, you know, this, the Every Mile Counts work is headquartered on ODOT site, the kind of the lead of the 4 agency work for our agencies. So we are about to initiate rulemaking. This gets in pretty nerdy pretty quick. So we are updating Oregon in 4 different, we plan to update definitely 2 and possibly up to 4 administrative rules to hardwire in our state's targets on greenhouse gas reduction into basically cities' comprehensive plans by the vehicle of the state's rules. So it's a pretty powerful vehicle. It is not easy work on local government side. They lack modeling and staffing resources. Community engagement. Oh, did we lose me?
Yes.
Am I back?
You're back now.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So did I leave off at the nerdy part? So we plan to update 2 of 4 administrative rules at least. And those are Division 12 for the Transportation Planning Rule, and possibly Division 44 for our greenhouse gas reduction targets for each of the 8 metropolitan areas in the state, and also Divisions 7 and 8, which which guide housing development in the state and goals. So we plan to, in an integrated way, update the state's rule on how our communities equitably coordinate transportation, climate, and housing plan to reach our greenhouse gas targets. Sadie, next slide, please. With this, I'd like to introduce William or Bill Holmstrom on our team. He's the lead for the rulemaking. And Bill, if you don't mind introducing yourself with your pronouns and what you want to get done before summer, please.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Bill Holmstrom from DLCD. He, him, his pronouns. Very happy to be here today and to get feedback on everything that we're working on over the next year or so. So these are the summary of the proposed outcomes that we've come up with. The full version of these 6 outcomes should be in the materials that you've received already from us. These come from some work that staff did ahead of our last commission meeting. We just talked with our commission about these outcomes, and they had a number of good comments and feedback, and we made some pretty significant changes to them in response to that feedback from our commission. So that's where these come from. You can see there's 6 of them. The first one is making sure that we have we're responding to these crises with urgency. In particular, the climate issue. We know that we need to act fast, and that we need that things that happen, things that we can do sooner, make it easier to do things in later. So urgency is the first one. The second one is to make sure that we're meeting our climate pollution targets. The commission has set a target for each of the Oregon's 8 metropolitan areas. So we want to make sure that we're working toward meeting those climate pollution reduction targets. Third one is supporting affordable and healthy living. This is a big chunk of where our connection with housing goes. We're making sure that as we're doing this work that we're supporting affordable housing. Along with that is the transportation connection, right? Where we're making sure that people can afford housing that's close to the things where they need to go, so they don't need to spend as much on transportation. That's part of housing affordability as far as we see it. The fourth one is increasing the capacity of particularly our local governments to respond to all these issues. We want to help build the capacity in our local governments or in our local communities to be able to work on these issues. The fifth one is ensuring impacted communities are consultant and help shape these policies. That's one reason definitely why we're here to speak with you today and make sure that we're moving in the right direction there. And the sixth one is developing metrics for equitable outcomes, making sure that we're doing the right things and that we, as we move forward, that both the state as well as our local partners are moving in the right direction and that we're measuring how we're doing.
Thank you, Bill. Sadie, if you don't mind, that's one of our key questions for you. The other one is about perspectives for the Rules Advisory Committee. So you can see the 8 metropolitan areas there that are currently implicated in the rules cited in Governor's executive order. So we're on the screen shows sort of again, a summary of the material in your packet. Just would ask task force members to sort of look at that for a moment and see if what we're missing. And that is the second of our key question, which I'll open that up in just a moment. We're in the process of doing kind of soft reach out to see if some luminaries will join us on the task force, but we have not sent even the inquiry email to folks. So we're very interested in seeing if there's a perspective or even a person that you would recommend that we invite to serve. Sadie, next slide, please. And we do, we know, can you go back to slide, Sadie? Thank you. Just real quick as I close. Before I joined the state 2 years ago as economic development specialist at DLCD, I kind of worked with local governments around the state, and we know that we know that business as usual on our task forces and commissions will yield business as usual results. So to ensure, at least a sample of people with lived experience and diverse perspectives are at the table to help shape that policy. We know that some stipending and support, also significant staff support, is necessary. So for some of the interest kind of rows that would not be part of someone's day job, that might be a community member or a community-based organization that's not necessarily part of their mission, we are looking and partnering with ODOT to provide those resources to help make sure that people can serve or present their perspective in a different way at the RAC if serving on long rules advisory committees is not folks' cup of tea. Thank you. If you could go to the next slide. And then these are our two questions. We snuck a third one in there because we're obsessed with measuring outcomes. That's an ongoing question. If anyone has sources for us on that, please let us know. Metro regional government has been involved in climate smart communities for also about a decade or at least 8 years. And they have been planning and meeting their targets and investing to meet their targets, with equity as one of the 6 regional desired outcomes and at the center. So there's a lot to learn from Metro, and also we're excited about the state's health improvement plan coming forward from the Oregon Health Authority, and we want to be benchmarking shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm with them on that. So our 2 formal questions that we did mail you about on Monday when Amira distributed the packet, or Courtney distributed the packet, is: are there other outcomes we should consider, or are there other perspectives that you don't see on the slide? So if we could go to the outcome slide, back to the outcome slide, Sadie, and just ask about that first. And if there's anything else you'd like to ask or mention, please, if it's off the question, please let us know. I turn it back to the chair. Thank you. Or Amira. Ben, at least you're off microphone. Are we audible?
Yeah, I can hear great.
Okay. Any suggestions for us are welcome. Thank you. Any task force member?
Thank you so much. EJTF members want to put their questions in the chat box or unmute themselves. We have a few questions in here.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Do you have the resources to pay community members in some way who give their time for this?
Right. I want to just be really clear about this. So it is not the $20,000 to $30,000 at this point per organization that I like, or 50,000. For example, Luminary Casey Jama Unite Oregon won't talk to me unless I have a 2-year contract, and I don't blame him. He's smart. So we have been stipending folks on our recent RAC Rules Advisory Committee, Housing Rules Advisory Committee for House Speaker Kotek's House Bill 2001 and 2003 at $5,000 per community-based organization. And sometimes that, for example, for our advocate who is representing, lived experience both of someone who's African-American, but also advocates for homeless community members, Laquita Lanford, she has been participating on the RAC. So they chose, Dr. Zapata's Institute of Portland State, they chose to participate on the RAC. The Portland African American Leadership Forum, for example, couldn't quite garner the interest from anyone to serve on these long rulemaking advisory committees. So they helped us form a focus group that we did via Zoom. So it looks a little bit different. Community Alliance of Tenants, again, was serving on the RAC. Naya kindly served on the RAC. So it was that. So we have been, it's not what I'd like it to be, but we're sort of trying to, figure out, better ways over time. So to a limited degree, yes. I just want to be clear about the amount. Thank you. There's another question from Ben. Thank you. Task Force Member Duncan, sorry. So the authority for DLCD, is it specific to providing guidance for local jurisdictions when creating comprehensive planning updates? Mostly. So if I'm going to try and remember it, we just had our commission retreat. So I think, and I should know this by heart, RS 190, 2, 3, and 4. Sadie, you could probably get me here. Matt Kroll, you could probably jump on and tell me, but we have 3 main statutes that we are responsible for, and then kind of some kindred statutes on farm and forest. But our main authority really is the comprehensive plans of local governments and supporting those according to the statutory mission and the statewide land use planning goals. The 19 statewide land use planning goals. And as we all know, those were created sort of in the early 70s. And so they do merit an update, including the name for citizen involvement. Goal 1 is woefully misplaced at this date and time. But yes, our authority is to sort of take the governor and legislative direction and make sure that local governments are sort of complying with respect to the land use planning statutes. So we don't get to plan ourselves. We're just sort of back body support. Okay, any other outcomes or other questions that task force members might have? Thank you for reading the background, Dr. Collins.
This is Jim. I typed in a few questions. One of the main things that I'd like to know is, I know your map was looking at the metro areas.
That's right.
About Eastern Oregon and what type of soft education might be done or considered to bring Eastern Oregon along. They've been fairly resistive to a lot of these issues. And just wondering what your thoughts are there. And then also on Division 7 and 8, when you talked about housing, I'm wondering if renewable energy and net metering and additional building codes for good houses that are airtight, you know, stay cooler in the summer. If you could just maybe elaborate on that.
Thank you. So your 2 questions, and I'll try and be brief, and then maybe also, Sadie, you could advance the slide to the perspectives for the REC, and I want to get off the agenda here by 9:40 so we can hear from Chris. Chris carries 25 agencies' work. So, so thank you, sir. The first question about Eastern Oregon, the majority of greenhouse gas reductions actually come from this part of Oregon, sir. So we have to, in our opinion, and per the governor's order, we need to take care of business here first for the survival of our species and landscapes and people. In addition, we do have tools like the Cool Planning Handbook that was developed by the Transportation and Growth Management Department that our regional representatives would be pleased to, follow up and kind of present, have a discussion about. It's, the pattern of development in Eastern Oregon with the average farm size in some counties being 40,000 acres is just so different from the Valley. So different strategies are needed. I know that several communities are interested in Baker County, for example, interested in Main Street work. And these are very small communities, but they also, are entitled to high quality of life as well. So we want to continue to extend that support while we take care of business in the Valley. That is my personal opinion. I think it's our agency opinion. And then your second question was on sort of energy and building codes. And Dr. Sheeran actually might be the best to answer this because it's in, I think, DEQ's part of the executive order. But I appreciate your question very much. It's not something our agency regulates, but I think that we know our energy goal is out of date. So we could have further discussions about that, but it is in sort of our sister agency or partner agency universe that we'd be addressing that and referencing it probably in our rules. Any follow-up? Did that get to your question, sir?
Yes, it did. Thank you. I'm just trying to, I guess, as a representative of Eastern Oregon, I'm just trying to get as much information in my head that I can share with others so that when we come out to the region, there's been some groundwork done already. So we're not coming in.
Sure.
Cap and trade came in cold and with a lot of resistance.
Of course.
I'm hoping that as other processes come in for carbon reduction, we get a little bit ahead of the curve and start to soften resistance before we necessarily come in with something.
Well, and honestly, sir, if I could suggest, the biggest threat I fear to Eastern Oregon is actually through the, changing environment, which we'll hear about in a moment, and the threat to sort of folks' way of life. That's what I fear the most: drought, fire, impacts on agriculture and forestry and ecosystems. So that might be a, in terms of developing shared interests, I'd love to have a follow-up discussion with you, maybe with our regional representative. And Courtney, if you could put us in touch, I'd be happy to share our cool planning guidebook with you, or Matt Kroll. Any of the team members on the phone today could do that, and we would be enthusiastic to follow up with you. One of our 4 biennial priorities is rural economic and community development, so I'd love to follow up with you as well.
Great, thank you, would appreciate that.
You bet. Please.
Several other questions. I want to make sure we're able to get through them.
Thank you.
So the next question I have here is from Ben. It says, curious about the authority for DLCD. Is it specific for providing guidance for when creating comprehensive planning updates?
So I think we did touch on that one.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And then we've got one below from Quinn Reed as well.
Mm-hmm. Quinn, if I may, and I think, Quinn, you're a task force member as well, so I say task force member Reed, thank you. The interest list is not appointed yet. So we are in the process of seeking, we're just building it right now. So if you have suggestions for other interests or specific folks, I'd love to hear it now or offline. Thank you. And I think Dr. Collins has like 6 questions, but maybe we should go to Task Force Member Duncan's next. So also curious about the state public transportation plan. Yes, so transit. Do I have transit on there? So yes, one-to-one interface with the need for transit. And I think that I've heard Amanda Pete say, our leader at the ODOT Climate Office, who's recently taken leadership of a new office there, say that we almost need 4 times the payroll tax we have right now to fund the transportation system we need to comply. So absolutely transit and transit funding. Thank you. And then in accordance, of course, with plans that have been developed. And then Dr. Collins, would you like to walk me through your questions? Just go as fast as we can and we can turn over to Chris.
I'll go quickly and we can talk about them later to save time, and you don't have to answer them all right now.
Thank you.
10 climate change report listed vulnerable communities as a #1 priority, and I want to stick to that. Still the case, and when you list things, I sort of see our material toward the bottom. Oh, that's not priority, but I would like to see things like environmental justice at the top.
Thank you.
Listening to 2010. 2 is just brass tacks. What's the race and income distribution of your projected emission plans in terms of transportation and housing? And I'd really like to bear down on those numbers. We can't do it here. And
me too.
If you insist on metrics onto EJ communities, then you must weigh everything you don't know equally to everything else. You cannot dismiss them. And that's a statistical argument we can discuss later.
Thank you.
4 is we need support. We're stretched to breaking capacity here. We have lots of requests. We're suffering from a wonderful riches of inclusion and really dynamic agencies doing their best. We don't have much support. So I just want to put it out there that we will need your support, as we have supported many agencies in the past in terms of the legislature. Point of clarification, it's a quick one. Intergovernmental, when I was studying legal aspects of it, meant federal and state and sometimes local, but here it sounds like it's just between state agencies. The last question, and it's a question not to answer to me, but to communities, is what are your brass tacks community deliverables? So we can discuss that later. I'm happy anytime. This is not a class, and there's other better questions. So thank you.
If you don't mind, Dr. Collins, or someone could send us that chat, I would be typing, trying to get a screenshot of it, but I'd fail something if I tried to do that. So if someone could email me those really good questions, and then love to chat, love to follow up with you on that. The most, they're all very good, but your last one about deliverables is we are, our chair, Robin MacArthur of our commission, and thank you, Dr. Ball and EJ Task Force for coming to our commission in Tigard last fall, a year ago. So we are still obsessed on kind of best practices for community engagement. We are still obsessed with what does this look like on the ground? So if anyone wants to talk with us about that, we're having an internal workshop with, I think, Vivian Setterfield and Oriana and Tony from Verde in sort of September 11th, which is a day. And we hope to begin to define just what do the, I hate to define it in-house because we really should be defining outcomes with community. So we might start to define it, but it really is, I think, in the process. So I should probably turn it over and maybe even get to adaptation, if that's okay. Thank you. Thanks, Commissioner Sullivan. Okay, I'm just scanning the chat. All right, thanks. Sadie, thank you each and all and for having us today. And with respect to support for EJTF, please let us know how we can. There's state agencies are required to coordinate with the governor's office with respect to legislative matters. But please let us know if there's any water that we can help that task force carry in terms of its work. Thank you. Sadie, please, I'd like to turn it back over to you and Chris.
All right, thank you, Kirsten. So we are moving on to the second half of our presentation. Once again, Sadie Carney with DLCD, and I missed the opportunity to share my pronouns earlier. They are she, her, hers. I won't tell you what I'm hoping to do with my summer, but I would like to introduce Chris Shirley, who is our Climate Resilience Coordinator, who has been working for quite some time on an update to a 2010 document, our Oregon's Climate Change Adaptation Framework. The updated framework is, as we have mentioned previously in this presentation, a 24 agency collaboration. And so, Chris, I will let you take it from here.
Great, thank you. I'm Chris Shirley with DLCD, she, her, hers. And my summer aspiration is to feed the mosquitoes at Waldo Lake. I haven't done that yet this summer. Okay, so as mentioned, the framework is a collaborative effort amongst many agencies, staff from many agencies, often multiple staffs. And the framework is intended to be a set of strategies for how to address climate change adaptation. It is not a work plan. And the work group that has been working on this in collaboration is divided the world of climate change adaptation up into 6 themes. And those themes each have a broad objective, an overview of what's threatened, what's at stake, and a set of adaptation strategies. And some of these strategies are doing what we're already doing better, and some of them are new. So the framework, draft framework has been posted on the DLCD website, and we are just beginning an outreach campaign, which I'll talk about later. But I want, for the EJ task force, I want to mention that equity is a central theme, and it is discussed both throughout the document and also within the social systems bubble there that you see there. We can go to the next slide. Central to the framework are some 5 implementing actions that we believe are necessary to achieve any of the strategies outlined in the other 6 bubbles. And I'm going to focus today on the equity and the vulnerability assessment recommendations that are in the framework. Next one. All right, so equity is a key theme and environmental justice that ran throughout the project, and we were very lucky to receive a little bit of extra funding from the Oregon Health Authority and Department of Forestry to hire a consultant to prepare a climate change adaptation equity blueprint. And they not only helped us, the blueprint is the deliverable. The project really was to help us, the climate change adaptation work group, think through some of these environmental justice and equity questions. But the deliverable will be a document, a blueprint that can be used by all state agencies, not only in the climate realm, but also outside. We are participating in the climate impacted communities work group, and we do have an internal DEI subcommittee or committee, which has been helping the equity subgroup of the work group on certain questions. Next slide. All right, so the equity blueprint is a document, and it identifies systemic barriers to achieving equity, provides some definitions to level out how we talk about environmental justice and equity, identifies steps for how we address impacted communities, and some methods that have been tried and used in other places, and suggest ways that we can embed equity into all of our programs, so it's not an add-on, it's actually integrated into all of our programs. And the document also will address ways to create more accountability. So when the blueprint is complete, it will be integrated into the framework itself. It's not complete yet. We can go on to the next slide. It will be available for review in September. And you should have received an invitation for a virtual meeting where the Oregon Health Authority will walk through the blueprint and give an opportunity for some advanced comments on the document before it's released for public review. And so yeah, so then following the September 15th advanced review, it will be appended to the framework itself and continue on through the framework review process, which I'll talk about in a minute. So that's one big aspect of the framework that I'm really excited about and really excited to share with you and hear your suggestions and comments. So the other key framework implementing strategy, next slide, is a vulnerability assessment. Many agencies have done vulnerability or are doing vulnerability assessments, but they're not integrated amongst the agencies. And so it's very difficult to use them to prioritize climate change adaptation actions. So the work group felt it was crucial to initiate a project to do a comprehensive vulnerability assessment. And for those of you who are not familiar with these vulnerability assessments in the climate realm, they are composed of an exposure to some trigger or event. The people or things that are exposed are sensitive or have degrees of sensitivity to that exposure and a degree of adaptive capacity. And each of those, the exposure, the sensitivity, and the adaptive capacity, have an equity element. So the vulnerability assessment will not only help us understand who, what, and where is affected, but why and what we need to consider from an equity standpoint to ensure that whatever we do to address climate change, to adapt to climate change, is not adversely impacting already impacted communities. Okay, I think we can go on from there. I do want to say that the vulnerability assessment is a big project, a multi-year project. And I'll talk about later about what we're going to do to hopefully get it kicked off. So our next steps are that the framework has been posted to the DLCD website as kind of a soft introduction. And in the next week or so, we will be sending out invitation to comment, emails, seeking a specific targeted audiences, and we have some specific questions that we would like those folks to consider. We expect to publish the framework in December. And like I said, the framework is not a bunch of projects. it started out as a bunch of projects, but we realized that we needed a strategy to fit those projects into. So the projects that we came up with will be published separately as a database and posted to the DLCD website. All right. We can go on to the next one. As far as our targeted outreach strategy, we will have a survey available to be completed with both qualitative and quantitative questions. And also, and importantly, I'd like to hear from you about this. We are planning a webinar series where we will talk about the strategies embedded in the framework from a coastal perspective, a rural perspective, and an urban perspective. And I'm open to doing more webinars, but and I'd like to hear from folks about that. But the main thing that I want to emphasize here is that the climate change adaptation strategies or impacts and strategies are different in these three areas. And so we wanted to focus attention on how they're different and how adaptation might work differently in those different places. Okay, we can go on. All right, so as far as DLCD actions, we coordinated the framework and we would like to continue with its implementation. In order to do so, the Climate Change Resilience Coordinator position needs to be continued. It actually is being funded by NOAA and a little bit of general fund at this stage, and that funding will end in June of 2021. So we have put together a policy option package that includes funding for continuing the Climate Change Resilience Coordinator so we can move towards implementation, but also very importantly, also includes funding to initiate this vulnerability assessment. And
Chris, we should acknowledge, yes, we have an acronym soup on there. So if anyone wants definitions to let us know, but I don't have time to go through them all today. Even I'm wondering what's sea level rise technical, SLR, sea level rise, thank you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So yes, we will be able to continue sea level rise technical assistance to local government through our NOAA funding, but we will not be able to continue the statewide climate change adaptation work without some funding from the state. So that POP is out there, and we are hoping that it will be funded in this very tumultuous and uncertain time, but the work needs to continue, so we're hopeful. Okay, that is pretty much it, and I'm open for questions now.
Thank you. There's a question from Task Force Member Reed, and maybe I should take this one. It's about which of these actions has been targeted for cuts. So, of course, we have the current biennium. It breaks my heart to share with this group that Sadie, our coordinator, communications coordinator, and policy analyst, that position is one that's been targeted for cuts. So Sadie is currently our liaison to the EJTF. With our approach to cuts, I should say, as a backdrop or budget reductions or budget rebalance, I should say that for this 17% exercise, which actually became a bit deeper for DLCD with the legislature's actions, we have prioritized maintaining sort of frontline support to local governments with our regional representatives and specialists. So my office, the director's office, and the policy office, we took cuts, but in doing so, we lost our probably one of our most valuable players, which is Sadie. So that's one. I can't not say that. Another position was a legislative coordinator, partly funded by housing fees. So the bulk of our reductions. Okay, let me say it this way: the bulk of the climate change work. We didn't receive new funding for that, so we're sort of reorganizing staff, and the bulk of those staff are funded by partially by federal funds, so those were not affected. Chris's position is secure through the through next year with the federal funding, but again, that is her position. She talks about the specialist, but that's her position. So Jim is quite focused, and Amira knows well that we're quite focused on, requesting that be advanced in the governor's recommended budget, but our fingers have crossed, of course, and Chris mentioned the $4 billion deficit the state is in. So that's a long little preview into the budget scenario. Let me see, there's a related question. And if it isn't funded, Task Force Member Duncan,
Well, I can
don't have a
address
good
that a
answer for
little
that.
bit.
Maybe Chris does, because I don't have a good answer for it right now, but we should. Thank you,
Right,
Chris.
so-
Please go ahead.
So like I said, many of the climate change adaptation strategies are things that agencies are already doing, and they just need to do them better. So there are strategies that will continue to be, or that will be able to be implemented with some tweaks to already existing programs. And I'm hoping, without a coordinator position, if there is no coordinator position to keep track of all that, it will be difficult to follow what's being done. But we were mindful in creating the framework that that there will not be, it's a networked program, there will not be somebody riding herd over this stuff, and that each individual agency needs to take responsibility for implementing their strategies. And as far as another question is, the highest priority in the framework for implementation in our mind are those 5 implementing strategies, because without those, the leadership, the focus on equity, the vulnerability assessment, and so on, we can't, and communications platforms, we can't do the work we need to do in a coordinated fashion. And one of the most important benefits of this framework creation process has been the relationships that we've built amongst the agencies, and we want that to continue. So
Hence the coordinator position, but it is hard to envision how that network would be maintained unless another agency came forth to maintain it.
That's right.
Such as, it's hard to envision, but it's, I would like to speak, if I could, to Task Force Member Duncan's question about the legislative mandated responsibilities that we have to continue to engage with and report to the Environmental Justice Task Force. We will continue that work. You might have seen Evan Manville, or he was on the phone listening when Sadie was on leave. He is probably listening right now, and so he will probably be our liaison. Even though he, so it's Director Rue has, sort of adverse to trying to thin the soup more. But this is not work, as we're all trying to center equity, this is not work that we could drop. So we will continue to report to and attempt to listen into to your task force meetings, and to just work with you or your members or on your recommendations shoulder to shoulder as we go forward. Thank you. Can we go back to the last slide with actions?
Oh.
And then the racial makeup of groups we reached through the webinar. This is an interesting one. Thank you, Task Force Member Seidel. And I probably mispronounced your last name. I apologize. But let's talk about the actions, and then let's also talk about the racial makeup of groups we reached through webinars. I'd like to just, that's a pregnant question. I'd like to discuss that some more if we could. So please, first the action. There's a Task Force Member Reed asked for the last slide with the actions on it, please.
yeah, is there a specific question around these actions?
Not a specific
think
one. I
that-
just wanted to see the snapshot once again. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, that's just with respect to our agency. So there are other actions for other agencies, but this is one we shared with our commission. And our highest priority are probably those top 2 up there, is to be able to continue the work. The racial, I'm going to scroll up on the chat here. There's a question about the racial makeups of the group we reached through webinars. So I think this is a very good question, actually. we have not discussed this internally, so I just want to, say that we can ask people to pre-register. That would require pre-registration. And then, or we could at least soft ask people to pre-register, and we could soft ask, not require folks to divulge their racial and ethnic background, and I would say gender and other, income, other indicators that can describe if we're reaching, a parallel to the state's population as a whole. So that would be, I guess, my response right now, and unless anyone has another best practice to let me know of. It's I would call it proprietary information to the person participating, so we probably wouldn't require it, but we could think about collecting and reporting the data we have. This is a best practice internally. I think it's a great suggestion. I might add a few other indicators to racial, geographic, sort of, 14% of Oregonians live with this disability, so always want to be thinking about that. Income. So, great question. Thank you.
Can I talk a little bit about how we developed our mailing list for inviting participation? The work group, the Climate Change Adaptation Work Group, spun off an outreach subcommittee, and that subcommittee, with the participation of all the other agencies, developed a list of organizations and people that they felt were important to weigh in on the climate change adaptation framework. So the list is made up of organizations identified as important, from public health to DEQ to energy. It's a very broad coalition of agencies. So we hope that we've captured a good representation of the populations in Oregon. However, if any of the task force members would like to look at that list and offer more opportunities for outreach and people that we should contact, I would very much like to hear from you.
That request is in the memo too. I think, did you mention you had 300 already? But if you
It's closer to 400. I mean, Sadie would know, but it's a whole bunch.
From 24 agencies.
Right.
Yeah, it is about 400.
Yeah.
Task force members, we don't have to stay on to our full 10:10, but I'm happy to answer any other questions as well, or let our team answer. They're the experts.
No one else have any other questions?
Well, there is a comment that we could do webinars in neighborhoods that are predominantly people of color. We can certainly do that. We have talked about that. But yeah, that might be something we'd want to consider.
I note the barrier of technology.
And exactly.
As well.
Yeah. So when
maybe folks could use their kids' Chromebook, but
yeah, exactly.
But not everyone has kids. Sorry.
Yeah. So one of the challenges of this COVID environment is that we cannot go out to community halls like we had anticipated we would do. So one of the aspects of this outreach is that I will personally talk to anybody who calls me, and I'm putting the word out that anybody who wants to talk to me can, and we can set up Zoom conversations with other agencies if need be. But in addition to that, if we don't hear from particular audiences that we feel are important to hear from, we are going to reach out specifically to them. So we're not just going to wait for people to come to us. We're going to be proactive in reaching out where we feel we're not getting appropriate representation.
Great. Ben, you want to try answering your question? I know Ben was trying to ask a question, but. Ben, can you hear us?
Can we hear you? That's the question.
I think he's having some problems with his audio.
Oh.
Ben, do you want to try putting your question in the chat box? Maybe.
I feel like we heard you for a second earlier. Oh, so close and yet so far. So are the webinars primarily information, or do the opportunity to provide opportunities for comment and input? We are trying. I'm trying to hold us to a 50-50 rule like we did today, so that we would be presenting for half and leaving at least half.
That's
for
right.
Community response. If we can get it down to 40-60 or 30-70, I think we're winning. So
That's right.
Yeah. Chris is
we're
probably
not
tired of
spend the whole
talking.
hour talking to people, at people, I should say.
Yeah.
Sure. So I got a question from Ben in the chat. Folks want
Uh-huh.
Thank you. Look at that. Right. Let's see.
I think that's for you, Kristen.
Right.
Kirsten.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a must do. As far as Member Duncan, we are enthusiastic about this partnership, and if I'm not mistaken, most commissioners in your task force is serving without pay, which is literally invaluable. I mean, but shouldn't be. So we won't break that trust, but I can only speak for DLCD and reciprocate. It should, no agency in this day and age, I mean, I can only speak for mine, and the governor's office has their own voice and they use it, but I don't think that this is, I personally don't feel that this is sort of dispensable. She wasn't dispensable 40 years ago, but it still isn't now.
Joel,
Yes,
this
thank
is
you.
Quinn. I just wanted to note, I just saw a chat from, I believe, one of the attendees who asked if we could read questions out loud, since it looks like attendees cannot see the questions that are posted in the chat.
Sure, thank you.
Oh, right.
And just a note on that, if you're, you can change your chat setting to go to all panelists and all attendees in the future if you want to do that as well, folks who are asking questions or comments.
Sure. Did you see the second part of Ben's question?
Yeah, I was going to ask Jerry, but would you like me to read?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. Okay. So, so Task Force Member Duncan says liaison positions and the threat to them. I would insert sort of concern me. We're talking about the state budget reductions, as Task Force members have been advocating for years to increase and improve the role and partnership with liaisons, and frankly, with expertise and competency around environmental justice, and they've been incredibly valuable to our connection relationship with agencies. I'm concerned that this infrastructure would be impacted, and would like to hear from all the designated agencies what impacts they may see and what strategies they have to ensure and continuity and ensure that this is a dedicated resource from agencies. So I answered that from DLCD, yes. So I think Task Force Member Duncan clarified that he'd like to hear from each designated agency. So I would turn it back to Amira and Terry Bo on that one. DLCD is committed. We won't break that trust. As I said, this is the return on investment of being able to meet with your expertise on this task force is off the chart. So we'll be here, and we're grateful. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I think we're at time, sir. Yeah.
Yeah, we're at time, but if anyone has any burning questions, please go ahead and unmute yourself. We can always catch up. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Appreciate it and look forward to following up. Thanks, Amira. Thanks, Courtney. Thanks, Chair Bowen, Task Force members.
All right,
Thank you,
everyone.
DLCD team.
Bye.
So I think at this point we're slated for a quick 5-minute break. Folks want to get up and stretch, some water, coffee, and we'll reconvene at 10:15. Great. Everyone's back. We've got a few things up next, but we'll just jump into some updates from the governor's office. So, Amir, I'll let you take it away.
Great. Hi, everyone. So a couple of things that I wanted to update you all about. First, the budget, what's been happening with the legislature, a couple of interesting things there, or with the past special session, and then about the Racial Justice Council. And then I will do my best to answer questions either now, and if I don't have the answer, I'll try to follow up with you via email or follow up tomorrow as we have our second session. So, and apologies for dogs in the background. Okay, so the first part I wanted to update you all on, you got a tiny bit of a taste from DLCD as they were talking about budget implications. So as many of you may know, COVID-19 has definitely taken a toll on our economy as a state. And we are currently in the process of every agency looking across the board to figure out what programs and positions are able to be cut. And then that will be reviewed and assessed by agency directors and governor's office to figure out what is the best way to balance that budget and to provide the services that serve all Oregonians. Those conversations are going to continue into the fall. So I will probably have a better update for you later when we have our next meeting, whether that's late September or October, and I can provide a little bit more detail then. But I just wanted to give you an update that, you know, some of the cuts may have an impact on vulnerable populations and EJ communities. In terms of if impacting the EJ task force directly, I'm not sure if there is necessarily an impact to the task force because technically we don't have a budget and we're all volunteer based. So things can definitely continue as they are, but that may cause a couple of hiccups in our internal strategy and plan to better resource the task force. But I'm still hopeful that the cuts won't have too much of an impact, but I'll have a better update for you later. On the legislative front, we had a short session, and that again was very focused on budget and a couple of policy items. Not too many impacts to natural resource agencies during the special session. I'm curious to know if you all have heard anything. It's been interesting dealing with the legislature during COVID, as many of the hearings are completely virtual, and that often gives a little bit of a disconnect between the legislature and members of the public and commission members. So that's definitely something to think about. Any questions on that before I just switch over to the Racial Justice Council? Okay. So with the Racial Justice Council, we actually had a meeting last week with the task force, and my colleagues Saporn Chang and Shannon Singleton. Actually, Shannon was out, but it was Saporn. And then Jason Miner. And I think about half of the task force members were able to attend. So thank you to those that could make it. And I would just welcome questions from folks that weren't able to join if there's something that you want to follow up on. But the Racial Justice Council is a body of community leaders and innovators appointed by the governor to assess reinvestments and policies around racial equity and racial justice. And again, with the recent happenings of what's been going on in the world around racial equity and justice, I think now is a really good time for the state to take a look and see what investments we're making in communities of color, Black and Indigenous communities as well. So the Racial Justice Council will be focusing on a variety of different policy areas, including health, environment, criminal justice and reform, I believe behavioral health, and then there's like a couple others, housing, to figure out how to best serve our most vulnerable populations. Under that umbrella is the Environmental Equity Committee, which I am co-facilitating with Jason Miner. We currently have one chair, co-chair secured for that. And we have a candidate list of potential members who I will be reaching out to with an invitation within the next couple weeks and gathering up those members to come together. The EJ Task Force meeting discussion was more around questions about having formal representation on the committee and just trying to gauge engagement. I'm trying to figure out engagement from the task force as to how you all want to participate in the committee or the council work. So I will kind of leave it at that and see if one of the other task force members have any comments about that meeting or something that they wanted to talk about specifically, or questions that came out of that discussion.
Quinn, Bob.
Oh, and I see something from Jim as well.
This is Bob responding to the relationship with us and the Racial Justice Commission. There's an issue of formality for structural change, and there's been some emails back and forth, and I think that's what I would go for. But with Quinn there and with the founding chair of EJTF there, I feel comfortable that there's an informal communication of thought and strategy and ideas for now. But if the governor changes or changes and it wasn't formal, then we might not be there. That's all I'm concerned about. But for the short run, given the times we live in, I'm comfortable with at least 2 people that have EJTF experience there. I would like more. I think they might be asking for more, and so is everyone. But that's my perception of that part of the meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, well, can folks hear me now? Yeah, look at that. A little reset, I guess, got me back in the good graces of the internet. I think what you were just saying, Bob, is what I've been really trying to express. And I think this is the same for, the conversations with the advocacy commissions, that formal representation is important. And absolutely, Robin, absolutely, Quinn. I know Hui, I saw your name on, a potential list. So I think the quality of the folks is not my concern. I think it is important that the EJ task force, if you're going to have a council or subcommittee on environmental equity, needs to be formally represented for all the reasons that Bob mentioned as well. Good for the short term, but long term, that would be a concern. And then, of course, just setting the precedent that EJTF or the Oregon Commission on Black Affairs, for that matter, is not just about individual representation, but the body itself, the relationships that body represents, the authority that these bodies and commissions hold, and that intersection that just strengthens the broader work. So, I think I've expressed this on email, Bob. You more or less said what I wanted to say, but I think that would be something I will continue to push for. Is really saying that the EJTF needs to, that needs to be next to people's names at some level, even if it's, between a few commas.
This is Bob. We can make that happen right now. We can have the Racial Justice Commission have a subcommittee called EJTF, and we can have a subcommittee called Racial Justice Commission. And it will be formal as to us. It will be ink on paper. It will be emails. It will be reports from subcommittees. And whatever powers that be, that's the power we have. I'm just throwing it out there. We can discuss it in executive session later if you want.
So just a quick comment about that. So for the Racial Justice Council, those are direct governor appointees. And the idea, I did give a couple of names to suggest for her to appoint that could also sit on the Environmental Equity Committee. But if the task force would like to have formal representation on the Environmental Equity Committee, meaning, for example, you have Ben Duncan as a member and he's representing the EJ task force as opposed to Multnomah County or the Commission on Black Affairs. That's something that could definitely be done.
And we have
Who has time and willingness to step up?
right now. So we have an EJTF person around there.
Yeah, I think so. That's a question. I mean, so, I haven't seen like whether this has been formally, people have actually gotten their like letters of formal appointment, but, for Quinn, for example, who obviously is bringing expertise, I would love to see EJTF aligned with that designation. And I think the same thing, as I've been arguing with, and I know advocacy commissions are also arguing for, is like advocacy commissions should be, not just the individual, but actually have formal representation. And I just think that's so important, and I say this somewhat selfishly for the Commission on Black Affairs. I don't know, thank you, Amira, for that clarity. For the Commission on Black Affairs, I mean, part of it is building the brand and building the ability of these bodies to be able to have long-term influence. And if folks are just seeing names and individuals and not bodies that they're connected with, I think we lose the formal intersections between that work, even to your point, Bob, if we're doing it informally because we care about each other and have relationship. But I think we lose a lot by not kind of utilizing those relationships. So I'll get off my high horse here, but I actually think it's a really important piece to build the influence long-term, the credibility long-term, and of course, bring the expertise in the short term.
If I could just add to that briefly, I know right at 10:30, I think the corollary to that too is whoever is serving as that representative, whether it's me or Ben or Hui or whoever it is, it's what is the expectation then for reporting back? Like how are we effectively serving as that conduit and the bridge between those two bodies? So, what are the expectations for conveying information and for collecting feedback from this body to communicate back? So I think perhaps this is a good conversation to have during our session tomorrow. And Bob, you brought it up, when you were talking about that proxy model. But certainly if I were going to be serving on the Environmental Equity Committee, I would want to know what you want to hear and when, and have a way then to say, hey, as the representative of the EJ task force, here are the priorities, right? So that I can report that back to. So I just think having that go both ways is important for us to establish.
Go ahead, Joel. Sorry, Chair.
I was just gonna say, it's really exciting that this work is happening. I know that we've certainly been, not quiet about our concerns when it comes to EJ and just racial justice in general for the Advocacy Commission. So the Racial Justice Council is exciting. It's exciting, and it looks like it really wants to do some serious work over the next few months. So, and I know that Hui and Quinn and Ben and possibly others will be on it as well. But again, I think we have a really unique opportunity now in which there's a lot of energy to be doing stuff, and it sounds like our governor and just government in general wants to do something. So I'm really hoping we could just capitalize on this opportunity, given the uprisings and just the proximity to the general election, and just the fact that we've entered a new decade. So I'm just excited about this work, and I also know how much work it is. So I also just want to express gratitude to Ben and Quinn and Bob and Hui and all their EJTF members, because we're doing this right now, but I also know that you are doing other work as well. And we're also still in the middle of a global pandemic. So there's that.
Yeah, I'd like to join in talking about the interconnectivity. And I know I might be starting to beat a dead horse here, but if the group is going to do some type of baseline assessment of the state, if there's any way we could incorporate some of the baseline questions that we would like to see to help us in our strategic planning, I think that could become a win-win. Not necessarily to take it over, but to coordinate with questions to get at data that could be valuable to both groups. Now, I'm making that assumption because as I looked at the sheet, Amira, that you guys sent out, it had a 1 to 3 month plan, a 3 to 6, and it looked like there'd be some data gathering there. So if there's any way we could work together to accomplish 2 goals with 1 budget, I'd like to suggest that we look into that.
That is a really good question and point, Jim. I'm not sure how much data gathering the committee will be doing or will be able to do, but there will be a point of information gathering for sure.
Does anyone else have any comments or questions for Amira before we move on? Or Amira, do you have anything else you needed to tell us?
That was it for now. I just want to make sure I was clear on hearing from you folks. It sounds like, yes, you want formal representation on the committee. And so I think it's just figuring out who that person or people would be. And I don't want to presume who would be interested, but I don't know how I should best handle that. If it's an email request or just an invitation to the task force members. And then if you all want to just reply back to that email with who would like to participate and has the capacity to be on the committee, maybe that could work.
Sure, and it'd also be nice to hear, like, get just information about time commitment, just because I know everyone here is super, super busy. So if we can get something that says, like, you know, here are the meetings and sort of what's expected per week or per month, that way folks can decide if they have capacity for it.
Okay, will do. And that was it. Thank you.
Sure. The only other question I had for you, Amir, is I know that 2021 session is still quite a ways away, but I'm just curious to see if there's any legislation in 2021 that your office is aware of that may be pertinent to the EJTF. And yeah, just curious, just because I've been hearing myself about some other bills I know some orgs are working on, but I'm just curious to see if there's anything big on your end that may interest us.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I actually should have mentioned that during my legislative update. So right now we are putting together concepts, what potential concepts could be. And of course, like the work that's been done by the task force over the past year, I've kind of grabbed on an opportunity to try to put together a legislative concept around environmental justice generally and around the task force structure based off of the initial feedback that I've heard from this group over the past few months or years. I am not sure where exactly in the process that is, but I'm happy to try to give like just a very brief summary of what could potentially go into a legislative concept. So in addition to the different structural things that we talked about, including like different memberships, I think we talked about like the homeless community being involved, or those that were formerly incarcerated also being involved and bringing that up, including some other agencies to report on to the task force. And then when we were talking about data assessments, trying to figure out if there is a way to do a larger assessment or study of some sort around EJ communities in Oregon and potentially mapping that out. And then I've heard from community members saying that they wanted a environmental justice office. And that combined with the willingness of this group to have a full-time FTE is also something that's being discussed. Now, it's going to be tricky to figure out what the right balance of bullets to include in a legislative concept, because there are budget implications. And also we haven't really had a robust discussion about what the task force is looking for going forward. So hopefully we can talk more about that tomorrow.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think my only concern is that, you know, we sort of take these 2 days and then our next meeting is until, you know, the fall. I mean, obviously it's not too late then, but I know legislative concepts, you know, November is a crazy month, and then next thing you know, it's 2021 and session's in full swing. Anyone have any questions for Amir about that piece of legislation?
Thank you, Chair. Amira, this is Hui. Would it be possible for some of that to be laid out the way you did it last long session, in a way for us to track it in as those concepts are coming together?
You mean, are you talking about like the updates, like the weekly updates to the group?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know what about all the bills yet, but happy to do that when long session starts.
Great. Thanks, Mira. Yeah, no, and for other task force members as well, I think maybe we could do this sometime tomorrow, but I know there's some cool stuff coming down the pike that folks are working on for the 2021 session. So as much as we can, it'd be great to be aware, just so that we're being as helpful as possible. In that case, we'll move on to agency reports.
Great. And so I think the way we're going to have to do this, because there are 36 attendees on here, it would be really helpful to, if agencies who could mention me could send me a message to be unmuted, that would be really helpful. And then during public comment, attendees, of course, we can do that as well. Let me see if I can do this. So I wonder if we should go in alphabetical order.
Sure.
I don't feel comfortable just calling on people. So agencies, if you just want to send me a quick message saying you're willing to talk, and then I can unmute you.
I think Stephanie had her hand raised, so.
Oh, hand raised. Okay, great. That's another way to do it. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Iboa and members of the task force. This is Stephanie Caldera, the Environmental Justice Coordinator for DEQ. I am trying to figure out if and how I can turn on my video, so I apologize. I haven't used the webinar side of this yet, so I think there I am, potentially. And if not, I will just read a quick update. We did send a written update to the task force, and there are two items in there that I actually would like to highlight. The first being a request from the Cleaner Air Oregon program. They are beginning a new rulemaking process that'll happen this fall, and they would like to seek a representative of the Environmental Justice Task Force to participate on the advisory committee for that rulemaking. This is a policy advisory committee, so you'll be asked to, the person who represents the task force will be asked to attend one meeting. That'll be in November, and there will also be an informational pre-meeting. Those dates are not yet set, and hopefully, if a task force representative could be sort of brought forward by September 4th, that would be helpful for the scheduling of those. And so this Rules Advisory Committee would basically review the proposed rules to evaluate them in a policy context, as well to do the fiscal impact, including the fiscal impact to small businesses. This particular rulemaking will be aligning some of the Cleaner Air Oregon air toxics rules with other air toxics and other general air emissions rules at DEQ, and actually is a sort of a broader additional programmatic update. As part of the information we sent to the task force, we included the letter from Keith Johnson, the program manager for Cleaner Air Oregon, with a little bit of additional detail, and then some contact information. And you could contact Keith or myself. We would be happy to, talk more with task force members or potential representatives, and as well to coordinate on any of those appointments that may occur. I'm going to pause real quick and see if there are particular questions on that item.
Feel free to unmute yourselves or put in the chat box.
And not seeing or hearing specifics, and I apologize if I have missed it. I wanted to highlight the second sort of attachment and a particular request. This is one that came through from Amira last week, and it is a request for the task force engagement on some upcoming technical workshops for greenhouse gas rulemakings. This is related, as you I believe task force members know, to Executive Order 20-04, and this is related to our new Office of Greenhouse Gas programs. I do believe I have my colleague Matt Davis on the call today if there are any particular questions. But this request for engagement would be specific to these technical workshops. And then at the bottom of the second attachment to the written materials you received is a specific request if the task force is willing and able to co-sponsor or co-convene the particular technical workshop that's listed in that chart as the Impacted Communities Workshop. And so Matt Davis, again, I believe is on the line if there are particular questions, but again, you can reach out to him. You could reach out through Amira, or you could connect with me if you have any feedback or questions or would like more opportunity to discuss this. And since we did send in the written items, and just in the interest of time, the last thing I'll address is from Task Force Member Reed, the request that each agency address the earlier question about the status of the Environmental Justice Task Force Liaison position, not permission, and the commitment to maintaining that connection, looking at the budget cuts at the statewide level. So I serve as our Environmental Justice Coordinator. That is a formal 0.2 FTE, so 20% of my time is allocated for environmental justice, internal and external work, and as part of that is my role as the liaison to this body. It actually noted in our written update, we are again seeking we at DEQ are again seeking a 1 FTE, so that would increase that time. That person would be effectively an equity coordinator, and environmental justice would be part of their work. As noted in the written amount, budget, all things budget aside, this is part of the agency request budget, which we'll submit later this month. And as it goes through the process, if this position were in our final approved budget, this would be another operations and policy analyst at a higher level, and at a full-time equivalent. I would no decisions have been made at the agency in terms of, if my role as EJ Task Force Liaison would continue for a transition period or a longer period, but we will keep you informed of this budget process. We at the agency certainly will have at least my position, the continued 0.2 FTE, and hopefully this expanded position through our budget request. Those are the primary items I wanted to highlight. You do have our written report, I believe, and if there's any particular questions or comments people have, I welcome that at this time.
Yeah, Chair, this is Ben. I appreciate that update. I appreciate DEQ seeking out that resource. Certainly, this is something that I'll bring back to the Commission on Black Affairs as we talk about kind of legislative advocacy in the future. And I would just say, Stephanie, you've been a real model for how to kind of do this relationship and play that role, even at a 0.2 position. So I just want to sing your praises publicly, because I really think you've continuously gone above and beyond, what we've seen necessarily in the past. So thank you.
Thanks, Task Force Member Duncan. And additionally, Nina DeConcini is on the line as well. If there's any other agency questions, she continues to serve sort of as my co-coordinator and also as a leadership team member at DEQ. So our engagement will certainly continue.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Looks like I got Kurt Melcher with his hand raised.
Yes, I have the list going here, Chair. So let's hop to, actually, Matthew, did you have anything that you wanted to talk about, or DEQ, before we move on? Nina, as well?
No, I just want to thank Ben for the kind words, and I so appreciate everything Stephanie does in the agency. So it's a particular pleasure for me to hear that recognition. Thank you so much.
Amira, if there's time, do you mind if I kind of elaborate on the request just for a minute or two? Okay, great. Well, hi, Chair Ebola and members of the task force. My name is Matt Davis. I'm a legislative and policy analyst at DEQ. And I just wanted to give a few more remarks about the second request that Stephanie talked about. So as you know, we're in the very early stages of designing programs to cap and reduce greenhouse gas emissions across a variety of sectors, including transportation fuels and large stationary sources and natural gas, among others. And at this point, we're doing a series of very early meetings that are open to stakeholders in the public to talk to DEQ about how this program might look, the scope of it, things like that. We envision 6 technical workshops, and one of them is specific to environmental justice and impacted communities. And our thinking on that workshop is to both talk about process, so how can DEQ design a rulemaking process that builds the capacity of and allows for impacted communities to engage meaningfully, and also the substance of the policy. So how can a greenhouse gas cap and reduce policy be designed to protect frontline and impacted communities and avoid, how do we avoid a policy that worsens existing disparities? And so, and I would say this specific workshop is also responsive to environmental justice communities telling DEQ that, coming to 5 different 5-hour-long workshops is that's a major time commitment, and one that is probably not reasonable for a lot of the communities and organizations we're hoping to hear from. And so our hope is that we spend this workshop really focusing quickly on the issues and priorities of environmental justice communities and the key policy issues that we know are going to be of most interest and concern, or expect of most interest and concern. And so again, the request is that we're really looking for any involvement from the task force or task force members, as individuals, that you're willing to provide in helping us design and convene this impacted communities workshop. The timing is, we hope to have the workshop in 4 to 6 weeks. We don't have a time locked down, and we'd certainly, you know, if the task force was interested in co-convening or having a task force meeting coincide with that workshop, we would of course accommodate your schedule. That would be our main priority. So I'll leave it at that. If there again are any questions, we're just looking to hear anything you're willing to share today or in the days to come. And again, our timeline is about 4 to 6 weeks from now. So.
Thank you.
Maybe make a suggestion. I think there's a couple of the appointments to some of these work groups. I think it might be best if we discuss these at our meeting tomorrow, because I know I'd be interested in some of them, but I also don't know what else is coming up for the rest of this meeting and other requests. And I think it might be good for us to take a look at all the requests and then kind of discuss them tomorrow as we look at what resources do we have available to be a part of these processes.
Thanks, Jim. Does anyone else have any questions for?
This is Bob. He, him, his. I just had one question. Sometimes when they do environmental justice, it becomes somewhat ghettoized. We have 6 work groups. We did EJ by having this one group. And so I don't want that to happen. And I'd like to know the relationship of EJ to the other work groups, or us to the other work groups. What's the relationship to the group? And if we're going to do it, we should bat last. You know, we should see what all the other groups do. But I'd like to see some integration. This is a complicated, long-standing cap and trade battle. And the emissions load on already disproportionately impacted communities, particularly the African-American community in downtown Portland, is something that should be part of every work group. But I just wanted to put that out there. And I thank you very much for your effort and your flexibility in terms of trying to incorporate us. I just would like to see it in every work group.
Yeah, Chair and Amira, do you mind if I just kind of respond to that quickly?
Please.
That's a great question, Bob. And so I would just say I want to clarify that the meetings are not, they're not work groups per se. They're not a standing group of people. There are 6 kind of standalone meetings that anyone is welcome to attend. And they're organized each around, the other 5 are designed to address specific program and policy elements in a cap and reduce system. And then the 6th, our thinking is the 6th meeting for impacted communities is to your last point exactly, that we take that as an opportunity to go back through those 5 discussions, 5 issue areas with a very explicit lens of environmental justice and impacted communities, as a way to both revisit all of those topics, but also do that in a way that's accessible for folks who cannot attend or don't want to attend 5 other meetings.
The organizational way this unfolds for EJ is that while batting last, we're sometimes a fly in the ointment because no one's paid attention to us until we finally get brought to the table. And so we're in the place of being a spoiler of the 5 other groups' technical work. And so I don't want to have us put in the role of killing a project to protect the environment. But if we, and I don't have an answer to this question, but it's a problem because if it's a lot of, we have low capacity, it's a lot of time, it's very technical. And if we really have to make a stand with our limited capacity, it's going to be at the last end and probably a little bit more confrontational. I'd rather be collaborative, and I think it starts early. And so I just want to put that out there with the consciousness of this dynamic. Perhaps we can change it. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Matt. I've got next here on my list, DLCD, Sadie.
Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Let's see. I think I can maybe, I don't know if I can turn off my camera. Sorry, you have to look at a picture of my twins as my screenshot. I'll just give this group a quick update because DLCD did have the opportunity to present at some length earlier in the meeting. We did submit our annual report to the Environmental Justice Task Force back in July. And in it, we talk about our Citizen Involvement Advisory Committee. You might recall from our presentation earlier that Deputy Director Green made mention of that goal having outdated language, and indeed it does. But the advisory committee that we support, or that my position supports for the agency, is a watchdog group and a group that seeks to assist local governments in lifting up their public outreach efforts. And I believe we've facilitated conversations between the Environmental Justice Task Force and our CIAC chair and co-chair in the past, and we're happy to do that again. We do have some vacancies on that committee right now, and with Deputy Director Green's help and leadership, we're trying to take a very intentional path towards appropriately representing the communities and population that we serve around Oregon in recruiting for those vacancies. The vacancies, the way the task force is set up is it is represented, there's one seat for each congressional district, and then there are 3 at-large seats. So as we begin to promote that work and start to recruit for those vacancies, we will definitely be reaching out to this group for any feedback you might have on candidates or any ideas you might have for people who could be interested in serving. So we're happy to take your feedback on that work. I'm not sure who for our agency will be the new CIAC liaison. If I had to hazard a guess, I would think it would be Deputy Director Green, because she is so interested and passionate about this work, as I think you could tell in her presentation earlier. But it is unlikely that I will continue to serve in the position that I have right now at DLCD due to the legislative budget cuts. And then I'll just touch quickly on the sort of the impact that the budget cuts have had on the items that we reported in our annual report to the Environmental Justice Task Force. So DLCD's largest budget reduction in the legislation that was adopted on August 10th, Senate Bill 5723, was the reduction of unobligated middle housing technical assistant grants, which were part of Speaker Kotek's House Bill 2001 that sought to create more affordable and equitable housing opportunities around the state. So we will return $1.1 million to the state for that. Other grant sources are significantly diminished, and let's see, I think there are 8 positions within our 60-person agency that have been either completely eliminated or have employee layoffs as a part of the budget reduction. And so that does impact our ability to sort of be as thoughtful and intentional in the work that we do, just because we are constrained in terms of staff resources. But I know that Deputy Director Green is very passionate about EJ work and about centering the work that we do on equity. So I have no doubt we will continue to have a presence here. But it does, the budget reductions do have an impact to the assistance we're able to provide to the state. And so that does have an impact that changes kind of what I reported in our annual report for DLCD. So I just wanted to call that out. And that's kind of most of what I wanted to touch on. I'm happy to take any questions from task force members or Amira.
Anyone have any questions? Okay. Thanks, Sadie.
Thank you so much.
I got Gabriela from OHA next.
Hi, folks. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Well, hello, I'm Gabriela Goldfarb. I'm the Environmental Public Health Section Manager at the Oregon Health Authority. Julie Cifuentes, who represents us, is out this week, so I'm stepping in. It's been, my pronouns are she, her, hers. It's been very nice to see some of the veterans on the task force from our past association. So that's been nice. I'll lead off and just say the budget cuts are not affecting OHA's staffing or engagement in EJTF. We have gone through budget cutting exercises, but not affecting this part of our capacity, of the environmental health program's capacity in particular. We submitted the annual report some months ago, and we submitted a double quarterly report just recently, covering the 6 months, the first 6 months of the year as well. So I'm not going to repeat what's in there, but I wanted to flag a few things that you've heard today and some things going forward. On the climate front, I just wanted to reiterate the climate equity blueprint that Chris Shirley mentioned in the DLCD presentation. So Emily York, who heads our climate and health program and chaired the equity subcommittee of the 24 agency, 25 agency interagency group. There were about 10 agencies that served on that subcommittee. And OHA was very pleased with additional funding assistance from ODF to be able to bring in Estelano partners who are based out of California to do the development of this. It's a combination of things. It was to provide training to the agencies who are participating in development of the framework about how to incorporate equity into their planning and implementation of work, and then a specific product that is coming out of this. And for the task force members, the longtime task force members, I think as Chris went through the list of elements of the blueprint, certainly you will see a lot of resonance, and it was informed by the handbook that the EJTF authored quite a few years ago now. So I wanted to acknowledge that legacy and connection. And to reiterate the save the date and invitation forthcoming for a 1-hour noontime September 15th webinar where our team will walk through the blueprint before it goes out for public comment as part of the overall climate adaptation framework. We wanted to have an opportunity for kind of a preview and engagement with the EJ task force and with the new interagency work group on impacted communities that Amira has been started convening. And so I hope that many, if not most, if not all of you would be able to participate that day. We would really value your input. Staying with the climate theme, under the governor's climate executive order 2004 that was issued in March, OHA got 3 specific assignments as well as the general mandates to all agencies to consider climate. The 3 are producing an annual, starting this fall, Oregon Climate and Health Report. And we are working on that. The executive order, well, when the executive order was issued, it came out just as the pandemic was erupting. And so, you know, in the weeks after, we did have a conversation with the governor's office and with Kristen Sheeran, and got some grace explaining that we definitely wanted to do all of the tasks our director, Patrick Allen, submitted a very detailed letter explaining what we have been doing and what we're doing going forward on climate and health, that in an approach that does center equity. But we are getting some understanding because of the other things on our plate on the timelines. So there is a September 1 deadline in the executive order for this inaugural annual Climate and Health in Oregon report, and we are now shooting for an October 31st release date. We just had a lot of staff in Julie Cifuentes' shop who was point on this, who actually were transferred to our, deployed to our incident management team and still doing contact tracing back up to local counties. So people have been really stretched and doing double duty. So that is the first deliverable. The next is a study on youth depression and mental health, which we are very interested to pursue, both with internal partners in our behavioral health team in OHA, but also with a lot of external partners. And that, the current deadline in the EO is for June of 2021. Both that and a third deliverable, which is a proposal for worker protection standards from heat and wildfire smoke, that we would be doing jointly with Oregon OSHA. Both of those have a June 2021 deadline, and we are going to have to push that back a bit. Also because with Oregon OSHA, they are currently engaged in a big rulemaking on infectious disease control in the workplace. So we kind of have to let them get farther on that before we can start up work on these worker protection standards. But I know the task force also has had long concerns, particularly for farm and forest workers. And we think that this proposal for worker standards, which the proposal is going to be developed so that it's consistent with the state occupational safety and health laws, and could be teed up quickly for adoption after the proposal comes out. So those, I have a couple more things, but I just wanted to pause as I conclude the climate part of the update. Are there any questions on anything I've mentioned so far?
If I may, Chair, this is Valentin. I do wanted to just make a quick comment about item number 3, directing OHA and OSHA to develop a proposal to create some sort of standards to protect farm workers. And I would just say that this has been an issue for many, many years. And I just want to remind people that Oregon does not have a standard. I believe both California and Washington do have standards, but as to Oregon, there isn't really anything. I think it's important that we don't delay this. We have many farm workers who are out there picking blueberries, cherries in 90, 100-degree weathers. And then we also have large number of nurseries where people are being tasked to work inside the greenhouse. And so I really think, we need to get this done.
Thank you. I will say that I understand from Michael Wood, the OSHA administrator, that heat was already, in particular, worker protection standards for heat were already on OSHA's to-do list. So it is, I think this elevates and underscores and puts a deadline, albeit again with some flexibility, but at least within our sights of adopting that. But I hear exactly the reasons you're saying is why it's on in the executive order.
Any other questions for Gabrielle?
And Cherry Boa, I have just a couple more things. I just wanted to pause because that was a lot of climate stuff.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I wanted to, speaking of legislative issues, I wanted to let folks know that a legislative concept that so far we have approval to move forward and to start, or at least to start exploring with our stakeholders, is related to our lead paint program. So Oregon is one of a dozen or so states in the country that requested and received authority from EPA to implement a federal lead-based paint program. And there's a few different flavors of that, but the basic idea is to require anyone who gets any kind of compensation for doing work that disturbs lead paint, that they have to do that work consistent with best practices for safety. And while we have that authority and implement that program, the federal law and regulations only pertain to requiring that the work be done consistent with those standards. But if somebody doesn't do the work correctly and makes a mess around a residence or childcare or school, then there has been no recourse. We can give them a fine, issue a civil penalty for failing to do the work correctly, but we haven't been able to require them to clean up the mess. And this, the amounts of lead that we're talking about, they fall below the levels that DEQ, DEQ focuses on larger contaminated site cleanups. And here we're talking about, imagine someone power washing the side of a house covered with lead paint and all of the ground around is littered with lead paint. The residents are tracking the lead into the house, and our concern, our priority is particularly around children under 6 years of age and that exposure risk. So this is really also aligns well with another program we have, our childhood lead poisoning prevention program. That program, when we get called out to a site, we've had pretty heartbreaking situations where residents are concerned, there's a complaint to the landlord and the residents may get evicted. There's just a lot of issues around us not being able to require cleanups to happen. So we think this is a priority, and this is a lens for all of OHA's legislative work. Has to consider EJ and in terms of being forwarded as a priority, and we were able to make a compelling argument. So there are several of your organizations that you represent. If you are, we would love to have kind of more in-depth conversations to walk through what the proposal is, but at a high level for the folks that OHA regulates, which are schools, childcare, and private residences. So this is something that tenant organizations have been very interested in. We are trying to raise awareness about this so that we can get input from folks on that. So I just wanted to flag that legislative concept. And the final thing that I will mention is just reminding people, and I don't know if Julie Cifuentes in the past has been able to talk about OHA State Health Improvement Plan. And that plan, the acronym is the SHIP, is not a plan for OHA, it's a plan for everybody in the state to prioritize what's most important to improve the health of Oregonians throughout the state, people in Oregon throughout the state. And the priorities that were adopted, this is last year already, really speak, I think, to this moment well. There are 4 priorities under the SHIP. The first is institutional bias, adversity, trauma, and toxic stress. Institutional bias is the first one. The next one is adversity, trauma, and toxic stress. Another is behavioral health. Another is access to equitable preventive care. And then the last one I'll mention, there are actually 5. The 5th is economic drivers of health. And I'll focus on that one a bit. That includes things like transportation, housing. I will say that the community groups that OHA engaged, and the OHA gave grants to community groups to engage their communities to be able to provide input. There was a lot of talk about climate. Climate was on the original list of 14 high topics. It didn't make the cut as a standalone in the 5 final ones, but there was a lot of interest from, it was near the top of the list apparently for youth, but it was a theme that the steering committee that advised OHA really wanted to see woven in. And so as we move towards implementation of the SHIP, which is kicking off this fall, I'm expecting that we'll be looking at opportunities to incorporate climate there, but also through housing, through transportation, that those are also, through those economic drivers of health, that those are other opportunities to weave in environmental justice. So I will stop there and see if there's any questions. Let's see, I'll look at the.
Any questions?
I had posted one about the lead paint, and I was just wondering if the penalty for not doing the cleanup could be equal to or greater than the cost of the cleanup.
So it's actually, I will tell you, it's something that we already tried doing. We currently tried as an experiment because the penalties that we levy, you know, often fall in the 1,500 to 3,000 to 5,000 level, depending on the egregiousness. And this is typically with landlords. And we tried to offer recently, without having the formal authority to require cleanup, that we would waive the penalty, the fee that they are required to pay if they would do the cleanup. And we haven't had a lot of success with that. So that was evidence for us that we needed to go the statutory route. But that would actually be a tool that we would want to use, because frankly, the civil penalties that we get aren't a source of significant funding for us at all. So we are very amenable to using that as a carrot to get the sites cleaned up, because that's really what the priority is. And our enforcement priority would be on locations that have children residing in the residences, or if it were a child care facility or something like that.
Great. Thanks so much, Gabriella. Good to hear from you again. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been nice I get to see you guys, see you all. So nice to see you. Thanks so much.
Okay, we got ODFW next. I think we got Kurt.
Well, yes, good morning. And I don't seem to have a camera here, but I'll just go with it. So my name is Kurt Melcher, Director of the Department of Fish and Wildlife. He, him, his are my pronouns. And I know we're up against the clock, Mr. Chairman and committee members or task force members, so I will be brief. I wanted to highlight a couple things for you all. The first is I wanted to mention that the question that was asked earlier with regard to budget cuts and impact on the agency's EJ task force commitments, since I'm the director and I'm also the agency liaison as well as the citizen advocate, as I have been since 2009, I can assure you that any budget cuts won't be affecting our citizen advocate. And our budget cuts, of course, were largely not a general fund funded agency, so we don't face quite the same the same impact on programs associated with general fund reductions. As far as, and of course we did submit our annual report, and I'm not going to go over that, you all have that. I did want to mention that on July 10th this year, the Fish and Wildlife Commission adopted a climate change adaptation policy. That's the first such policy in the country. It's something we've been working on for several years. It's focused largely, as you might imagine, on adaptation, if you will, in that we recognize and have long recognized that the climate change impacts are really, in many cases, first being felt by our fish and wildlife resources. So we want to make sure that we're strategic as we prioritize and build adaptation and resilience for these populations. I also wanted to mention that we do have an Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund and an associated advisory committee with that fund. The advisory committee essentially develops and prioritizes project funding for funds from that funds that are in that account. And the committee has really been building an emphasis on funding outdoor equity projects of late. I mention that largely because we do have 2 vacancies on that advisory committee currently. They're geographically described. One is a representative from the Blue Mountains or Columbia Plateau area, and another is a representative from the coastal zone, if you will. And so, and I certainly don't expect any of you all to raise your hand, figuratively or literally here, raise your hand and volunteer to serve on that committee. But if you have any good candidates, we are keenly interested, in particular if they can bring some diverse views to the implementation. So with that, Mr. Chair, I am happy to answer any questions or to just get off the Zoom here and watch the rest of the reports.
Thanks so much, Kurt. Any questions?
And good to see you too, Bob.
Okay.
Director Melcher, this is Quinn Reed. I just wanted to say, thanks to both you and Davia for all your work on the conservation and rec side. I think it's really exciting, and among the stakeholder groups I work with, it's really important to see that succeed. Could you talk just a little bit more about the timeline for that? And perhaps also just to clarify for these 2 vacancies, these are folks who will get to decide how money is spent, right? I mean, they're actually going to be directing funds.
Yes, and Mr. Chair and Quinn, good to see you as well. That is correct. The committee, it's governor appointed, so it's not Senate confirmed, but they are governor appointed seats, the 2 vacancies. The committee essentially makes recommendations on how to spend the revenue that's in that fund, and I can go into the details on the fund. Originally we had $1 million in general fund that was put in that account. It was it was very unusual in that the $1 million of general fund last legislative session included a provision that before we could access the $1 million, we had to generate $1 million in private, non-state, non-federal funding to match, and then the legislature would release the other $1 million. Of course, the global pandemic really put a kind of a crimp in some of our fundraising plans. And then in the last special session, the legislature swept that $1 million out of that account. They did make the statement, though, that they expected to be putting back whatever matching funds that we generate through donations. And right now, I think we're at about $110,000 that we've generated in donations, largely through our license system from license purchasers, fishing and hunting license purchasers. So the membership of the committee does have play a direct role in determining how those funds are spent. And we're excited about it.
Thank you. The list of potential projects is really exciting.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks so much. It is 11:27. I know we have Senator Merkley coming on at 11:30, so I don't want to start another agency update. That's right, Amira, right? He's planning to come on at 11:30.
Yes, that's right. I don't see him quite yet. So it might be okay if if Andy wants to go up. Really
Sure. Go ahead, Andy, and then if he comes on, we might ask you to pause and then resume after Senator Merkley is with us.
Okay, that sounds good. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. So I'll try and keep this brief. I'll hit on the question that was asked first. So again, Chair Bola, committee members, my name is Andy White. I'm the Northwest Oregon Area Director with the Oregon Department of Forestry. And I am the citizen advocate with the task force here, both myself and Ryan Gordon. And the question was, what is our participation going to look like going forward? And I would say through this fiscal year, through June of 2021, I have high confidence that we'll be able to do that. And the question in my mind becomes, in the next biennium, given some of the numbers that are being kicked around with reductions, I'm less certain about that going forward. And at the same time, our agency has submitted a policy option package for additional capacity for liaisons, both for the Environmental Justice Task Force and our government-to-government relations. And so in this budget climate, I don't know how successful those will be. But in the short term, high confidence, I will be able to participate. A little more uncertain going forward. I'd say there's, I had forwarded to, or I guess Ryan Gordon, my other counterpart, had forwarded a short video to Amira and Courtney that you guys can look at on your own time. And it was geared towards cultural resource protection, a project that we had worked on with the federally recognized tribes in Oregon. And it was really focused on awareness and training for staff who are involved in fire suppression efforts and come across cultural resources in that effort. Whether that's building fire line with hand tools or heavy equipment, the video covers the value of those items from a tribal perspective. So there's more awareness and context, as well as rules associated with protecting cultural resources, and what you would do if you were to come across those resources. So pretty cool. It was exciting to get that completed and get it out to folks so we can reduce the likelihood of damage to those resources. Another item would be Senate Bill 1602. It's probably also been referred to as Memorandum of Understanding, or the Grand Bargain Bill. And essentially it includes several significant changes to protection requirements for non-federal forest lands. And so I'll just focus on two that I think are probably most relevant to the task force. And one of those is the bill includes language around the aerial applications of pesticides by helicopters. And it increases the buffers required around various things, riparian buffers, as well as buffers around homes and schools. And for example, it would make that buffer go from 60 feet. Now it would go to about 300 feet around homes and schools, water intakes, and things like that. And those requirements would be going into effect in January of 2021. And there's also language in the bill about providing real-time announcements, such as the day prior, to nearby residents and water users, so that there would be real-time awareness of aerial applications to those folks that are, I think the language says, within a mile of an aerial application.
Hey, Andy, we're gonna have to pause for a quick second.
Okay.
So at this time, I know we've only got 10 minutes, and I see that Senator Merkley's on. So I wanted to make sure that we gave Senator Merkley an opportunity to share with us some really exciting piece of legislation that I know him and Senator White and other folks are working on. And Senator Merkley and I had the honor of being together on a panel at the DPO Summit in the fall. So great to see you again, Senator Merkley. I appreciate you being on here with us, and I'll let you take it away.
Well, good to be with you. Am I unmuted? Can you all hear me okay?
Can hear you great.
Okay, tremendous. Well, thank you for inviting me to join you all. This process that you're engaged in, just as I heard a few words about things like streamside buffers, considering how to improve the environment and engage in environmental justice. And it's just, it was 2007, I believe, when I was speaker, that we signed on to the bill, Senate Bill 420 in Oregon, that had been written by my friend Abel Gordley, that created the commission that you're serving on now. And so that work and that concept of environmental justice has just gone through to the work that I continue in the US Senate. I think it's really come up a lot in the context of the Green New Deal. How do we completely rebuild our energy economy while creating good paying jobs, and particularly addressing the needs of jobs in communities that have been impacted or bypassed by the economy in the past and that feel more impact by environmental damage. We just know that too many families living in communities of color, low-income communities, were denied the same health and environmental protections as families living in more affluent places. The air is dirtier, the water is more contaminated, and we have some horrific stories from around the country where folks in low-income communities were really ignored when there were significant environmental risks to them, like lead in the water. And Flint, Michigan continues to be just something that reverberates in our hearts and minds of what can happen. But we have issues like landfills and incinerators and other waste facilities that can produce toxins that are particularly hard on young children as their brains are developing, and not at all good for adults either. We often see fewer parks and fewer green spaces and fewer grocery stores. The idea behind the Environmental Justice Task Force that you're all serving on is something you all know well. So I just want to thank you all for very much being engaged in that effort. I think the COVID impact has put a spotlight on the disparities that exist within our country in all kinds of ways. And I'm really pleased to sponsor the Environmental Justice for All Act. And that act, if we were just looking at the sorts of things it does, it'd be things like a federal energy transition economic development assistance fund paid by fees on fossil fuels to support transition from greenhouse gas dependent economies and help people in underserved communities. President Clinton's executive order is in there from 1994 that required all federal agencies to make environmental justice a core part of their missions. You have federal agencies required to consider the cumulative health impacts under the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, which is basically taking on a loophole where they only look at a little bit of the picture when driven by administrations that do not want to look squarely in the face of potential environmental impacts. There's support in that bill to take on harmful consumer products and to take on grants for research and development on health disparities and to improve public health in environmental justice communities. So that's just a quick sense. I just will close by saying thank you for the work that you're doing, to have a conscientious effort to publicly address these issues. They are not swept under the rug. They are not ignored, is absolutely what we have to do. And we're undertaking that here in Oregon, but we need to undertake that same mindset across this country. And that's what I'm trying to drive forward in the US Senate.
Thank you so much, Senator Merkley, for all your hard work and for putting Oregon on the map when it comes to advocacy for environmental justice. And I appreciate all your efforts early on to make our work a possibility.
You're most welcome. And feel free to contact my team at any time. I have people, we're immersed in environmental work. I don't know if you have a moment for me to expand a little bit on what could possibly happen next year, or you're out of time.
Please.
So we're in a dark space right now with an authoritarian president, a Senate that is completely failing. It's over 3 months ago that the coronavirus bill was passed through the House, and the Senate hasn't considered it on the floor. And so America is suffering while the US Senate slumbers. Mitch McConnell has just thrown up his hands. He's walked away. He essentially, at first, didn't act because he had division in his caucus and he didn't want to take sides. And then he didn't want to act because he wanted to clear the space for President Trump to come in with a couple executive orders and play hero of the day. And those executive orders, as you've probably heard, are just a whole lot of nothing. A deferment of a couple things, but a deferment for a low-income family means greater debt obligation later on. It doesn't really help them in the overall picture. They had a moratorium on, we had a moratorium on not foreclosures, evictions. And what did the president's executive order do? It didn't extend the moratorium, it created a committee to talk about the issue. So that's worse than nothing. That's pretending to do something while actually shutting down the moratorium we have right now. And then it had a rewrite of the federal assistance, cutting it in half for unemployment insurance, would require everybody in the country to reprogram their computers because it's done at the state level for unemployment insurance. And it only works if his executive order says the states have to put in 25%, which most states are in the red right now and don't have the money. So what I'm looking for is hopefully a bipartisan majority that has a very different view of the world, to be in power next year, to completely repudiate Trumpism, to take on systemic racism, to take on environmental justice, to drive a fast transition from fossil fuels to renewables. Our Earth is in big, big trouble. The feedback loops are getting worse. Just this week, we had a study come out how warmer soils put more carbon into the air. And that means all of the Earth that's covered with land as it gets warmer is producing more carbon. And that's equal to a huge amount of the overall picture. We've been worrying about methane, frozen methane, melting and bubbling up. We've been worried about the ice disappearing in the Arctic Ocean and Antarctic absorbing more. These feedback loops are really scary. It's just another message how fast we have to move, but we can do it in a fashion that makes, and not just better for curbing and starting to decrease significantly the global warming gases, but do it in a manner that creates jobs and support and cleanups for highly affected, low income and communities of color that have been on the receiving end of some of the dirtiest aspects of our economy. So I'm excited about what could happen the first 6 months of next year. And that's kind of giving me energy for pulling me out of the darkness, of the current darkness, and saying there is a better future, and we are going to have an opportunity to seize it. And that's my hope and my prayer that we do so, and that's where all my energy is going.
Thank you so much, Senator, for your time. And again, please feel free to call on the Governor's Environmental Justice Task Force at any time for anything you might need in helping our nation move forward.
Thank you so much. Take care of you all. Thank you for the work you're doing.
All right, gang. I think at this point, if folks have any comments about Senator Merkley's remarks, maybe we can take a few minutes and just chat about it. I know some of you have context, but I got an email from one of Senator Merkley's staff that he was signing on to this really awesome EJ bill. I know Bob took a fine-tooth comb in it, but again, super exciting that we were able to have Senator Merkley on. I was trying to get in contact with Wyden's office. Like, I was having a tough time getting through, but maybe next time we can have him on.
Well, this is Ben. I'd be interested, Bob, in your take. I mean, I put it in the comments, but I appreciated how Senator Merkley used the exact language that's in the statute here in Oregon around considering environmental justice. And so I'm curious, in your read, I haven't read the bill or set of bills. Is there any additional kind of description of what that means, and what can we learn from that as we potentially look to strengthen the kind of EJ legislation in Oregon?
Yes, the consider word has been problematic in our statute. And what one group says is consideration we don't even know about. So it's been all over with EJ. So I can bring out that language of community environmental impact statements, and that is to be considered. Now, one thing I didn't do in that memo, to keep it short, with NEPA, you have to do an environmental impact statement, and it's been a battleground. It's been failed promises for EJ, and there's an article on that. This changes that. Not only do communities get noticed at the EIS stage, they get noticed at the very early stage, the environmental assessment stage, where there's very scarce notice requirements. You can be being assessed sitting where you are right now and not know it. And so the consideration aspect just puts it where it should be. And I think that we could look to that as a concrete thing to do, you know, something very basic and black and white. Here's a community environmental impact statement, and it has a process right there how to do it. So that's something that would expand the consideration in a way that, you know, really does consider the environmental justice impacts. We have to fight for, you know, we're put in these confrontational situations instead of collaborative ones because of this resistance to incorporating what consideration means. And you have for years, as chair and otherwise, tried to move that word forward. And if I were to change or use any one thing from this act to our statute, it would be that word consider. So that's my feelings about it.
Thanks, Bob. Anyone else?
This is Bob. I will just say, what's amazing with this bill, and the old, as they call us veterans now, know, is that cumulative impacts part. If they're going to do a vulnerability assessment that looks at inter and intra-generational impacts, bioaccumulative impacts are the first step they go with. And so things that bioaccumulate are an easy first step for a lot of reasons. I'd like to see gender oppression and racial trauma and all that included in a vulnerability assessment. But if you don't include cumulative impacts, then you're really not getting the picture of the decrease in the quality of life that you get as an environmental justice community. So that cumulative impacts has been a battleground. I've never seen it so strong in any piece of legislation ever. So I don't know, it's going to be a hard one. Look at where we are in this state of Oregon. Compared to that, what's in between there? Cumulative impacts is the big one. And we're not a big state. We have one big city. We could do urban biocumulative impacts. We could do biocumulative impacts for farm workers. You know, that would be a smaller and easier population. Tribal populations, you can do that. You know, if people trust medical, you know, in these communities, that can be difficult. But nonetheless, that is a breathtaking change. And I know that a lot of the statute is aspirational. I've talked to people that write legislation for senators, and the money and the grant and all that. This is just a warning shot of the first 100 days. This is, the Green Deal is coming. EJ is going to be a big part of it. And when they ask what EJ wants, there it is. So I'm just so grateful for our senators. We're very lucky.
Thanks, Bob. It's 11:47. I know we're supposed to go till 12. So maybe real quick, Andy, if you could finish your report. And I think we had one more person who had to report out. So Andy, I'll let you finish out, and we'll go from there.
Okay. I guess the last thing I just offer up is we're kind of in the throes of fire season right now. We've got about 7 interagency teams on the landscape across all jurisdictions in Oregon right now. And we were kind of at the end of a 5-day lightning event that impacted primarily Eastern Oregon. That started about 120 fires that we continue to provide capacity on. And so we're at a point where resources are becoming limited. And with that, Governor Brown issued an emergency declaration yesterday that gives access to more additional resources and including National Guard assets. So the forecast is helpful over the next few days. We just have a lot of fire starts on the landscapes that we're challenged to keep up with right now. And operating in the COVID environment has definitely required us to do some additional planning. And that appears to be paying off. So far, we're doing very well with regard to COVID and managing our fire camps. I'll stop there and just see if there are questions. That may be a better use of time.
Any questions? Okay. I see here Renee and Christina both gave updates in the chat. Is ODA still on? Allie?
Allie from State Lands is here. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Terrific. I will be quick. Good morning, Chair Oboa, task force members, Allie Ryan Hansen, citizen advocate for the Department of State Lands. First, I just want to mention that DSL is beginning to examine our community engagement practices to both create shared expectations for our team and for the public of consistently and meaningfully engaging. There are a lot of ways that we do engage, and also other places where we want to make sure we engage on bigger picture issues of how lands and waters are managed and protected. So we're beginning that in the fall, and I am really excited to be starting and to report back on our progress. Just a few other items of interest. The Elliott State Research Forest proposal is expected to be to the land board in December. We've been working with OSU for the past 2 years, exploring this idea of a research forest on the Elliott. Engagement has been a priority throughout that exploratory process. And as the pieces of our proposal come together for the land board, we're going to be looking to do even more. So the overall concept is extensive, inclusive, accessible engagement with multiple opportunities to learn about what's being proposed, to interact with the project team, and to provide input both to the College of Forestry and to the land board. As a first step, we're planning to ask this month for feedback on the engagement options we're looking at, and then have a final plan in place for September with engagement and promotion of the opportunities happening in October and November. Next, DSL is beginning an update to Oregon's map of essential indigenous salmoniid habitat, or ESH, in those areas that are designated as ESH. Removal permits are required for any amount of removal or fill. We work with ODFW to identify those areas and to update the map through rulemaking. We haven't done that since 2015. So we are putting together a rules advisory committee now, and starting conversations with tribes as well. We're expecting that committee will be meeting in September, October to have conversations and to draft rules. We are going to develop a full engagement plan for this with the environmental justice principles as a guide to ensure meaningful engagement and promotion of those opportunities. Last, many of you may have seen the recent news stories regarding an issue with a fiber optic cable project off the Oregon coast. As a result of that issue, we're hearing interest in examining the state's regulations and policies for siting undersea cables, with a particular emphasis on potential environmental impacts. This is an emerging issue, so more to come in future updates. Finally, I'm the agency's citizen advocate, and my position's not included in any reduction options. We're not a general fund agency, so our impacts are likely to be fewer than they are for other agencies. And we are actually hoping to increase our capacity around addressing environmental and racial justice issues, specifically in our work around rulemaking and community engagement and policy, by calling out that work for specific positions and making those positions permanent. And that is all for me, unless anybody has questions.
Thanks so much, Allie. We've got about 7 minutes left, so I just want to quickly check if we have anyone for public comment. If not, we'll try to get in some more agency updates.
Please either send a quick note in the chat or raise your hand if you'd like to make a public comment. Okay, I see Anna Molina.
Did I accept? Okay, sweet.
Hey, Anna.
Everybody, do I have like a certain amount of time or?
Let's say about 2-3 minutes.
Okay, I'll try to work fast. Hello, members of the EJTF. Yeah, my name is Anna Molina. I worked as the statewide EJ manager at Beyond Toxics. Ourselves, along with other environmental, racial, and social justice organizations and tribal organizations, wrote a letter that was also sent to you, along with the governor and other agencies in regards to the Oregon Climate Action Plan. Received that letter. It was written in support of the Oregon Climate Action Plan, where we support the efforts of prioritizing climate action within governmental agencies, with the EO being an opportunity to transform Oregon's natural resource-based energy infrastructure and economy to systems that benefit all people. We just had a question of like, what is the EJTF planning on being involved in this executive order on climate change, and is there any way that our organizations us and the organizations who signed on to that letter can be helpful? I know you guys were talking earlier about the Racial Justice Council. I just wasn't sure if that's also tied to this executive order. That was just one of the questions.
Thanks, Anna.
Anna, this is Bob Collin, and those questions are very important. I want to say yes, but with stretched capacity and the, implying the commitment of unknown others, I really don't feel that comfortable saying yes on that. But we need all the help and support we can get. Sometimes letters are lost in transmission because we're all scurrying, but the messages get across. And so as these things evolve, Professor Robin Morris Collin is part of that in terms of environmental issues, and she's very approachable about this. And I think it's your groups, Beyond Toxics, help that will make us build bridges between EJTF and other groups with environmental justice, environmental equity, and environmental racism. So that's a blurred answer, but it's the best one I have for now.
Thanks, Bob. So it's 11:57. We have about 3 minutes left. So I just want to see if any task force members had any closing comments or things they'd like to share with the group, and hopefully tomorrow we can catch up on our agenda before we close.
Yeah, Chair, really quickly, I just wanted to lift up what Valentina had brought up earlier, just around farm workers. I know Oregon OSHA has some rules that are out for public comment now. So I didn't look at Friday's agenda, but I don't want to miss that opportunity. I think it's important that we, as an EJ task force, provide comment on those proposed rules. And so I'm happy to work with Valentina and anybody else around the table on that. But I hopefully we can carve out some time tomorrow to discuss it.
Yeah, I hope so too. I also been chatting with Bakun because they're going to be, I know OSHA had in here too, about the Cora Purifoss are launching a campaign. So I've been chatting with their lead over there and was hoping that they would be able to come and chat, give public comment or just talk to us a little bit about that bill. And just forest worker and farm worker protections, especially since COVID is hitting those folks first and worst. I know the governor did spend $30 million and we've got the quarantine fund and the Oregon Worker Relief Fund as well, but workers are still dying. So definitely.
And then the only other thing I had was just, I don't know if with the CAFO, is there anything that we're supposed to do with that? Or is that just kind of a FYI based on previous conversations? So I don't know, Mira, I don't know, Scott, if you're engaged in any of those conversations.
I believe it's a FYI. There's a lot of work that's been done over the past year on that.
Thanks, Amira.
Yeah, it was my understanding that it's just an update. I don't know if there's anything new and specific, but that's kind of what I was seeing it as.
Thanks, Scott.
And I just want to mention that there is a group in Eastern Oregon that is tracking the CAFO situation. And they might be listening in now or maybe tomorrow, but it's Oregon Rural Action. And they will be tracking this, and they've approached me, so I'm trying to fill them in on what I know and give them an opportunity to participate significantly in the process.
Great. Thanks, Jim. We got time for one more comment from EJTF members before we close out for today.
I have one quick question, Chair.
Sure.
If, there isn't more public comment. Okay. Apologies to everyone for running short on time. I love working with this group, and I feel like we never have enough time, and I could really spend like all day talking about EJ issues and talking with folks and making sure we're having all these robust conversations. I really love it. So for the agency folks that weren't able to discuss, I saw that there were a couple of updates in the chat, and I'm able to save the chat, so I'll make sure the task force members see that. But if there are other agency updates that you want to share with the task force that wasn't included in the agency report, feel free to just send me an email. I'll make sure that the task force members can look at that.
Yep.
And along with public comment, if there's any other public comment that folks want to discuss, I'll put my email in the chat right now.
Great. Thanks, Amira. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you all tomorrow at 9 a.m. for our second round.
Thank you, Joel.
Thank you, everyone.
Sweet. Thanks, Amira.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to
Yeah, I'll
make
see
sure
you
I'm
tomorrow.
able to capture everything.
Sounds good. I'll see you tomorrow.
All right, see you tomorrow.